Stop lying, Roy, you signed it. You knew exactly what it would do to those families. The words didn't just echo, they cut. A sharp, human sound in a room designed to feel untouchable. Everything stopped. Welcome back to Whisper Realm. How are you all doing today? Trust you're excited to jump on this interesting story. Before you do that, do well to support the channel, like, subscribe, and share to make it go viral. Thank you. Now let's dive in. The crystal chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling of the Fletcher estate trembled almost imperceptibly, their lights scattering across a sea of black tuxedos and tailored gowns. Just seconds earlier, that same room had been alive. Applause, laughter, the low hum of power moving comfortably in expensive shoes. Now, silence swallowed it whole. Roy Fletcher stood at the podium, fingers locked around the edges, so tightly the veins in his hands rose beneath his skin. His speech, carefully prepared, legally approved, investor polished, hung unfinished in the air. Every camera in the room snapped toward him, then past him. Because the voice hadn't come from a press. It hadn't come from a rival. It hadn't even come from someone important. A ripple moved through the crowd. Confused whispers, half-formed questions, the subtle shift of people turning not just their heads, but their entire bodies, trying to understand what they'd just heard. Roy didn't move. For a moment, he looked like a man who had forgotten how. Then, slowly, his eyes lifted from the podium, not toward the investors, not toward his legal team, where Darren Pike had already gone pale, but toward the crowd itself, searching. Security along the walls straightened instantly, hands brushing earpieces, scanning for a threat that didn't fit the moment. One of them took a step forward, then hesitated, because there, near the edge of the ballroom, where the polished marble met the shadows of the service corridor, stood a girl. Small, still, unflinching, 12 years old, maybe. And somehow, she was the only person in the room who didn't look surprised. A camera zoomed in, then another. The whisper spread faster now, sharper. Who is that? Is this a setup? Did she say families? Roy's expression shifted, just slightly. Not anger, not confusion. Something worse. Recognition. The kind that doesn't ask if something is true, only how much of it is. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the air felt heavier, like the room itself was waiting, holding its breath. Because whatever came next wouldn't just interrupt the night. It would change it. And somewhere in that silence, one question settled over everyone watching. Who was she? And how did she know? 10 minutes earlier, the Fletcher estate had been glowing. Perched high above the Potomac River, the mansion stretched wide and confident against the Maryland night, its glass walls reflecting water and city lights like it owned both. Black SUVs lined the circular drive. Valets moved with quiet precision. Inside, the ballroom pulsed with influence. Politicians from Annapolis, Baltimore developers, investors who spoke in numbers too large to say out loud. Everything about the night said certainty. At the center of it stood Roy Fletcher, 38, billionaire, founder of Fletcher Infrastructure, the man behind half the Skyline projects reshaping Maryland's future. He wore confidence the way others wore cologne, subtle, expensive, expected. And yet, something was off. Up close, it showed. The way his jaw tightened between sentences. The way his smile came a second too late. The way his eyes, sharp, calculating, kept drifting downward instead of meeting the crowd that admired him. Elaine Mercer noticed. Of course she did. Head of Investor Relations, flawless posture, watching Roy like a stock chart on the verge of dropping. So did Darren Pike, his legal advisor, standing just off stage with a tablet in hand, ready to steer things back on script if needed. Because tonight wasn't just another announcement. It was the announcement. The Baltimore Harbor redevelopment, marketed as transformative, inevitable, historic. But buried beneath the polished language were terms no one on stage was eager to say out loud. Except Roy knew them. He had signed them. And somewhere in the back of the room, Sylvia Harris stood quietly beside a catering table, half hidden behind trays of untouched champagne glasses. 12 years old, daughter of a night shift cleaner who worked offices in downtown Baltimore. She didn't belong in rooms like this, which is exactly why no one noticed her. No one, except the way she noticed him. She wasn't looking at the chandeliers, or the cameras, or the people trying too hard to be seen. She was watching Roy Fletcher, longer than anyone else dared to. Like she could see something slipping beneath the surface, something no one had named yet. And then, without asking permission, without hesitation, Sylvia stepped forward. There are moments when someone sees what everyone else ignores. And if you've ever felt that quiet pull, that sense that something isn't right, even when everyone else pretends it is, then you already understand why Sylvia couldn't look away. Sylvia didn't stop. Not when the marble floor opened into the center of the ballroom. Not when the conversations around her blurred into a low, confused hum. Not even when she stepped past people who would have turned anyone else away. She just kept walking, straight toward Roy Fletcher. He noticed her only when she was already there, close enough to break the invisible boundary that surrounded him. His sentence faltered for half a second before he caught it again, eyes dropping briefly toward the small figure at his side. She didn't look nervous. That was the first thing that felt off. When the applause swelled and the room shifted into a pause between speeches, Sylvia leaned slightly closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I sit with you?" Roy blinked, caught mid-thought. "I think you're in the wrong place," he muttered, glancing quickly toward the edge of the room as if someone would come collect her. "I know," Sylvia said simply. There was no apology in it. No fear either. Just fact. Roy studied her now, really studied her. The plain shoes. The stillness in her posture. The kind of calm you don't expect in a room built on pressure. Before he could respond, she moved. A small step, then another. And just like that, she sat down on the velvet bench beside the stage, like the rules didn't apply to her, or maybe like she didn't see them at all. Roy exhaled through his nose, something between irritation and disbelief. "You shouldn't be here," he said under his breath. Sylvia looked out at the room, then back at him. "I won't be loud," she said. "I just didn't think you should sit alone." Roy let out a quiet, almost humorless breath, gesturing faintly toward the crowd. "I'm not alone." Sylvia tilted her head, studying him in a way that felt far too steady. "That's not what I meant." A pause settled between them, thin but heavy. Then she added, softer this time, "You look like you don't want to be here." Roy didn't answer. He didn't correct her. He didn't even look away. The applause started again, somewhere behind them. Another speaker stepping in, another polished voice filling the room. But it felt far away, like the night had split into two different worlds. One loud, one quiet. Sylvia stayed where she was, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes still on Roy like she wasn't intimidated by anything around them. "What do you do?" she asked softly. Roy let out a faint breath. "I build things." She nodded, glancing briefly at the towering ceilings, the glass walls, the carefully designed perfection of it all. "My mom cleans them," she said. That pulled his attention back. "Office buildings. Downtown Baltimore. Mostly at night." She shrugged slightly. "She says you can tell what people are like by what they leave behind." Roy didn't respond, but something in his posture shifted. Sylvia continued, her voice careful now, like she was stepping across something fragile. "She was talking about this project the other day," she said. "The harbor one." Roy's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the bench. "She said some people might have to leave their homes." There it was. Not loud, not dramatic, just said. And somehow, that made it heavier. Roy's jaw flexed. "It's more complicated than that." It was the same line he'd used in meetings, in private briefings, in rooms where no one questioned him twice. Sylvia nodded, accepting it easily. "I figured," she said. "Big things usually are." For a second, it almost sounded like she was agreeing with him. But then she looked at him again, really looked, and asked gently, "But if people get hurt, does complicated matter?" The words didn't accuse. They didn't push. They just stayed there. And for the first time that night, Roy Fletcher didn't have an answer. Roy inhaled slowly, like he was buying himself time. "It's not that simple," he said at last, his voice low, controlled. "Projects like this, they're bigger than one outcome. You're talking about jobs, infrastructure, long-term growth. Thousands of people benefit." The words came out clean. Practiced. He'd said them before. Sylvia listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged. Not skeptical, not convinced. Just present. And the families? She asked quietly. Roy's gaze drifted past her, back toward the room where people laughed too easily, where deals were already being celebrated before they were fully understood. There are relocation plans, he added. Support systems. It's not like they're just being pushed out. Even as he said it, something in his tone thinned. Sylvia didn't challenge him. She didn't need to, because the silence that followed felt heavier than disagreement. And in that space, uninvited, unavoidable, something else surfaced. A memory. Not polished. Not controlled. Sharp. A smaller house. Annapolis. Boxes stacked too high. His mother's voice, tight but steady, saying it would be temporary. A notice on the door with language no kid should have to understand. And his father, quieter than Roy had ever seen him, staring at a piece of paper like it had rewritten their entire life. Redevelopment, they had called it back then. Opportunity. Progress. Necessary. Roy blinked, the present rushing back and around him, but it didn't feel as solid anymore. Because now the distance between then and now had collapsed. And he could see it, clearer than he wanted to. Sylvia's voice broke through gently. You built all this, she said. So, I think you understand big things. He didn't answer. She studied him for a moment longer, then said the one thing he hadn't been able to say to himself. You look like someone who knows it's wrong, but hasn't said it yet. The words didn't rise. They settled, deep. And Roy Fletcher, who had spent years mastering what to say, when to say it, and how to control every room he walked into, sat there, silent. Because sometimes the hardest truths aren't shouted. They're recognized in silence. And if a moment like that has ever found you, then you already know why this story matters more than it should. The room around Roy felt like it had condensed, pressure tightening like a vice. Darren Pike, his legal advisor, shifted in his tailored suit, eyes narrowing. Something wasn't right. He watched Roy's fingers drumming on the edge of the podium, too deliberate, too hesitant. Every investor in the room was expecting a flawless announcement, a final signature, a victory lap. And Darren's job was to make sure it happened. Elaine Mercer, head of investor relations, caught the faint twitch of Roy's jaw and froze. A subtle unease ran through her, the kind that could ripple into boardroom panic. Millions of dollars, years of reputation, political favors dangling by a thread, they were all watching. Roy felt the weight like a storm pressing down, each heartbeat sinking with the whispered calculations in the room. He could finish the deal, follow the script, keep the applause coming. Or he could do something else, something that hadn't been rehearsed, that hadn't been sanctioned. Sylvia stayed at his side, calm in a way that made the chaos feel distant. The ballroom's glittering chandeliers and polished marble floors might as well have been invisible. Her eyes didn't dart at the cameras or the suits or the flashing phones. They stayed on him. You can still choose, she said softly, almost a whisper. The simplicity of it, so quiet, so impossible to ignore, sliced through the tension. No argument, no persuasion, just a truth that needed recognition. Roy looked toward the podium where the speech lay scripted, printed, expected. Every step forward would cement the night, the deal, the public narrative. And then he looked at Sylvia. Her presence, unwavering and honest, anchored him in the moment. For the first time tonight, the choice felt like it wasn't about performance. It was about responsibility. The room didn't notice the shift yet, but Roy did. Roy didn't answer her. Not out loud, but something in him moved. Slowly, he pushed his hands against the edge of the bench and stood. The motion was subtle, but in a room like this, subtle didn't exist. Heads turned instantly. Conversations dimmed. Darren straightened. Elaine exhaled, relieved for half a second. This was it. Back on script. Roy Fletcher, back in control. He stepped forward, adjusting his jacket with practiced ease. Every movement familiar, rehearsed 100 times in rooms just like this. The version of him they all expected had returned. Behind him, Sylvia didn't move. She stayed seated, small against the scale of the ballroom, watching without urgency, without doubt. Roy walked toward the podium. Each step felt heavier than the last. Fear had been loud before, pressing, urgent, relentless. Now, it was quieter, clearer, and something else had taken its place. Not confidence, not yet, but responsibility. It came in flashes. A front door in Annapolis closing for the last time. A younger version of himself standing in a room that no longer belonged to his family. A signature on paper, clean and final, placed there just days ago. And Sylvia's voice, steady and unshaken. You can still choose. Roy reached the stage. Darren gave him a small nod. Tight, controlled, a warning wrapped in reassurance. Stick to the plan. Elaine watched from the front row, hands clasped, already calculating recovery paths, investor calls, headlines. Roy stepped behind the podium. The microphone stood exactly where he'd left it. The speech lay in place, neatly printed, safe. He placed his hands on either side of it. For a moment, everything aligned perfectly. The room, the expectations, the version of him they all believed in. Roy Fletcher, the man who didn't hesitate. But his fingers didn't move. His eyes lowered briefly, not to the speech, but to the memory of it, the clause, the consequence, the cost. Then, slowly he looked up. The room waited, silent, certain. Roy leaned slightly toward the microphone and paused. Roy's fingers loosened on the edges of the podium. The speech sat untouched. For a brief second, it looked like he might begin, like everything would fall back into place, just as planned. Then he slid the paper aside. A small movement, but it landed like a crack through glass. Before we go any further, Roy said, his voice steady, but different now, stripped of polish. There's something I need to say that isn't in this statement. The room shifted instantly. A ripple of unease. Darren straightened. Roy, he started, low and urgent. Roy lifted a hand. Not aggressive, not dramatic. Final. I signed the agreement for the Baltimore Harbor project, he continued. And I didn't ask the questions I should have. A murmur broke out, sharp, confused. I overlooked provisions that would displace families, he said. Real people. And that's on me. Gasps now. Audible. Elaine's expression hardened. Darren took a step forward, voice tighter this time. We can address this privately. No. The word cut clean through the room. Roy's grip returned to the podium, but it wasn't tension anymore. It was grounding. Effective immediately, he said, looking straight into the cameras now. This project is suspended until those terms are removed. No one loses their home because of something I approved without fully standing behind it. Silence. Not the kind that waits. The kind that lands. Heavy. Absolute. For a second, no one moved. Then everything did. Phones lifted. Reporters surged forward. Conversations erupted in fractured bursts. Investors leaned into urgent whispers, already calculating fallout. The room that had come together in certainty began to split. But at the center of it, Roy didn't look at them. He looked past the cameras, past the chaos, back to where she sat. Sylvia Harris. Still, quiet, watching. And for the first time that night, Roy held her gaze. The noise didn't follow him outside. By the time Roy stepped onto the wide stone terrace, the chaos inside the Fletcher estate had dulled into something distant. Muffled voices, closing doors, a storm contained behind glass. Out here, Maryland felt different. The Potomac stretched out in front of him, dark and steady, reflecting fragments of moonlight that broke and reformed with the current. No cameras, no expectations, just space and silence. Sylvia sat near the edge of the steps, her feet swinging slightly above the stone, like she had nowhere else she needed to be. She didn't turn when he approached. I figured you'd already gone home, Roy said. I wanted to see if you were okay, she replied. He let out a small breath and sat beside her. Not as Roy Fletcher, the billionaire, not as the man from the podium, just as someone trying to understand what he'd just done. For a while, neither of them spoke. The water moved. The night held. Then Roy asked quietly, Did I do the right thing? Sylvia tilted her head, thinking about it in a way that felt more honest than careful. Did it make things harder? She asked. He gave a faint, almost tired smile. Yeah, she nodded once. Then probably. Roy looked out at the water again, letting that settle. The uncertainty was still there, the consequences, the fallout, everything waiting for him inside those walls. But something else had replaced the weight. Clarity. Sylvia slid off the step and brushed her hands lightly against her jeans. I should go, she said. He nodded, then hesitated. Hey, she looked back. Thank you. She studied him for a second, then gave a small shrug. Next time, she said, don't wait for someone like me. And just like that, she turned and walked back toward the mansion, disappearing into the same background she came from. Roy stayed where he was, watching, not the doors, not the lights, just the space she left behind. Because some voices don't echo, they stay with you. And if this moment felt real, if it reminded you how one quiet choice can change everything, then carry it forward. Stories like this only matter if we don't forget them. Thank you for staying to the very end. Trust the story is worthy of your time. Always stay tuned for more of our video. Subscribe, like, and share to make it go viral. Thank you.